very much for the good. Yeah. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm most grateful that you have decided to take part in our seminar this afternoon, since I'm aware that our title may sound a little bit too theoretical for meticulous revelation and reception experts. The proof of theory is in the pudding of texts and images, you may think, and quite right so. Nevertheless, before enjoying the exegetical pudding, it is a good idea to set the hermeneutical table. That was at least the idea when Regis and I were enjoying not pudding, but beer. This beer, more exactly, who is this? After his instructive lecture on the apocalyptic number the year before the last, the number of the beast, I'm sure many of you remember well. It was then that I recalled a discussion on the hermeneutics of reception history in Frankfurt between the series editors of Blackwell Bible Commentary, John Sawyer and Christopher Rowland, and the editors and authors of Evangelisch-Katholischer Kommentar. As you will know, the Blackwell Commentary is a beacon of reception history in Revelation research. The commentary by Judith Kovacs and Christopher Rowland has been described as groundbreaking. And as you will also know, the EKK, Evangelisch-Katholischer Kommentar, is the only great commentary in German language research that places great emphasis on the history of reception, or more precisely, on the combination of the classical historical critical toolbox with what Paul Ricoeur called carrière du sens. You are certainly working, I hope, with Martin Carra's EKK on Revelation, which is rich in reception history, completed by Otto Böcher's volume on Revelation in Architecture as a special issue in the same series. However, in EKK, there are as many approaches as there are authors to what may be called career of meaning, from Ulrich Lutz's monumental pioneering commentary on Matthew to the zero solution in Michael Walter's commentary on Romans. As an editor of the EKK and author of the commentary on Acts, and perhaps also as a German scholar and white old man, I have an innate interest in hermeneutical order, and such as Barth the Swiss, the claim to theological validity. This was obviously less important to the editors of the Blackwell commentary, so that our Frankfurt discussion led to the alternative Roland Barthes or Karl Barth. These are, of course, symbolic names. I do not intend to lecture on these two unalike masterminds, but they represent a clear alternative. Is a history of reception a cumulative enterprise in which the changing meanings of a text of Revelation are hung side by side like pieces of laundry on a washing line? This is the centrifugal tendency preferred by Kovacs and Rowland, and both such brilliant papers I've heard from Regis in Regensburg and Löwen. If I may say so, 666 from apocalyptic anxieties to a delicious beer, certainly not as intoxicating as the anxieties. The other centripetal tendency reduces all possible meanings to the only basic meaning claimed by a theological or ideological system. So the alternative is anything goes, Roland Barthes, or of course a Paul Feyerabend, or the truth stands, Karl Barth. It is a deadly alternative since, according to Roland Barthes, the best thing that can happen to the meaning of a text is the death of its author, or as Roland Barthes would have said, scriptor. For Karl Barth, the only death that really matters is a cross. Stat crux dum volvitur orbis sensuum. Once again, the clear-cut alternative, anything goes, or the truth stands. As a rule, clear-cut alternatives are undercomplex. And there are many circumstances in which undercomplexities are permissible. A reception network and seminary is not one of them. Therefore, today I will present the hermeneutical system that is often the guiding principle from the paper of the Pontifical Biblical Commission, The Interpretation of the Bible in the Church from 1993, to hermeneutical study groups in Protestant theology, for instance, in the Zeitschrift für Theologie und Kirche, and that determines my own approach in the IKK. One reward for your patience will be the insight into a thesis that would have been at least familiar to Regis, why reception history is not just another exegetical method that was Regis' thesis in Leuven. So, chapter 2, transversal exegesis and polyphonic understanding. Let us start with a history of exegesis in 7 to 10 minutes. As a starting point, I chose an adapted version of Karl Bühler's so-called organon model, which has gained fundamental importance in linguistics for the analysis of communication processes and their medial transmission. I simplify it heuristically in order to achieve 5 descriptive goals. First, the relative autonomies of author, text, and recipients. Second, the medial or organon basis of the Bible. Third, the reactive and productive appropriation of the text in the act of reading, hearing, performing. Roland Barthes' chaos of meanings. Fourth, the necessarily limited function of historical criticism in the structured overall process of specialized exegesis. And 5, right and risk of theological interpretation, or where is Karl Barth's place? So to the organon model. Each communication, even in a diachronic dimension, which I have added to Bühler, combines an author who uses the text as organon to put the issue on the table or to bring a matter into dialogue. By the way, the term dialogue is difficult because each dialogue avec passé will be a monologue. That's why it is necessary to have advocates for the original meaning, but that's another problem. The starting point is simple. You see a triad of author, text, and recipient. There's a primary context of the original meaning against its historical horizon. And there is a recent horizon of me, the reader, or hearer, here and now. Understanding, Gadamer says, is the Horizontverschmelzung, the merging of horizons. However, this seems all too simple because there are many, in fact, countless secondary contexts, and this is where the history of receptions come into the game. Let us now reconstruct the conventional historical critical toolbox. After the biblical text was presented for print by Erasmus and Cisneros, the first critical method was, of course, textual criticism, pioneered by the oratorian Richard Simon in the 17th century. A Catholic, mind you, the critical method were developed by Catholics to disprove the sola scriptura. And so Richard Simon's book was burned by the Inquisition. This method was later popularized by the Göttingen Protestant Johann David Michaelis in the Age of Illumination. As you see, the critical approach focused on the handed down text itself. In the late 18th century, the transmission lines between the text and its author or authors began to be analyzed by means of source and literary criticism. In the next century, the 19th century, the horizon of tradition and the history of religion, concepts, and motives began to be in the center of exegetical interest. At a similar time interval, namely at the beginning of the 20th century, biblical scholarship turned its attention back to the text as such, distinguishing and investigating its literary genres and forms. Here we are in the field of classical form criticism. Again, a generation later, with almost compelling logic, but surprisingly late, that is, only since the 60s of the 20th century, the redactor himself, with his narrative strategies and theological intentions, became the subject of exegetical interest. The names of the pioneers are, of course, Marxen for Marx, Conselmann for Luke, Trilling and Strecker for Matthews, step by step. The dynamic was, as you see, absolutely consistent. It covered all dimensions of the historical text, and it encompassed all biblical writings, those of the Old Testament with a time lead. The revelation of John was a latecomer to this development. Literary criticism, for example, was not tackled decisively before the ICC by Robert H. Charles, 1920, I think. Theological interpretation in all denominations, especially in the Catholic Church, was more or less independent of all this progress. It followed its own systematic traditions, and it is this circumstance I tried to symbolize with a somewhat cloudy symbol beyond and above the hermeneutical apparatus. One reason for this is the horror vacui you perceive at the right hand, the right side of our schema. The generation of my exegetical fathers and forefathers, especially in the Catholic Church, experienced the development of the diachronic methods as a process of liberation and even theological illumination. The discovery of the historicity of the Bible redeemed them from the dogma's claim to eternal absoluteness, for which the Bible at best provided confirmatory verses, what was called quarry exegesis, Steinbach exegesis. This is the state of affairs during my undergraduate days. We learned these methods in the pro-seminar, especially with the voluminous handbook by Heinrich Zimmermann, the Methoden Zimmermann, and we did not really realize the redeeming effect of diachrony any longer. What we felt was that we ourselves, the recipients, played no role whatsoever in the whole procedure. We lived on the right-hand side, so to speak, hermeneutically homeless. An exegetical hermeneutics that literally excludes the reading subject, his or her concerns, his or her biography and faith history, that in fact treat the mea res agitur of the Bible reader as the whimsy of lay people no longer needs to be abandoned. It has already given up on itself. So on Saturday, we would go to the so-called special lecture by Eugen Trevermann, who took a death psychologically and existentially focused approach. From today's perspective, this certainly had its flaws and weaknesses, but it allowed us to make a decisive discovery. We, the recipients, the readers, had a role in the text. We bent, as you might say, the letters apart and entered the narrative world beyond the hermeneutical gap. This is precisely why reception history is not just another exegetical method. It is the logical continuation, or more precisely, the completion of 300 years of author-centered engagement with the text. However, chronologically, the sequence started with the reader, seen from the perspective of liberation theology, depth theology, feminism, and today, post-colonial studies, and so on, recipient-centered. The initiative was at first carried by marginalized misfits, but it has long since reached the mainstream, perhaps in the Anglophone culture more than in the German-speaking world. At the same time, especially in France and Italy, exegesis moved from the author to the text itself, semiotic, narratological, rhetorical analysis, and so forth. As you may see in our scheme, the only open space is between the text and its various secondary contexts, and this is where the history of reception began. In the IKK, initially with an interest in interdenominational reception and dialogue. What we clearly have now is a lack of balance in the hermeneutical process. Barth, the French, has realized his dream. The author is dead, dead as a doornail. The left hand, you see it, is empty. And if there is communication at all, it is communication with oneself, with one's own bubble, but not with the original witnesses of Judaism and criticism, with what is called in German Urkunde, der Offenbarung. Rootless, at best an aesthetic self-referential reading circle. So why bother at all? Tina Pippin suggested to read Revelation not any longer, but to invent one's own apocalyptic muse better fitting to what she already knows without John's revelation. So reception is no longer necessary. We can write our own revelation. In sum, the great idea of the New Testament is in danger of being lost. To hold the beginning that goes with us, as Caruana put it, der mitgehende Anfang. Meanwhile, in the grandchildren's generation, diachronic methods are once again seen as an act of liberation against an ideology of bubbles. Man can do nothing without the making believe of a beginning, George Eliot has phrased in Daniel Deronda. I gave some disgusting examples in my review on apocalypse research in the Theologische Rundschau. Instead, today I'll give you just one example, which is admittedly quite extreme. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the Caliph of the Islamic State, has earned an academic degree in exegesis, Quranic exegesis, of course, at the Islamic University of Baghdad with a doctorate graded as magna cum laude. He was an expert on apocalyptic images, indeed. What might our world look like today if he had attended a normal Methoden seminar as part of his exegetical studies and had had the opportunity to familiarize himself with the methods of criteria-based historical text exploration? Nothing is less self-referential and more peacemaking than a boring historical article. The historians at the left-hand side wanted a window to the biblical otherworld, but what we have often now is a mirror. Perhaps one approach is even more peacemaking and certainly not self-referential, a remedy against bubbles, the central line between the text and the readers, all the readers in all the centuries and all the cultures. Communication unlimited. Indeed, more than just a new method, the hermeneutical realization of der mitgehende Anfang. This is what Yosemite is about. But not without the Urkunde, the Anfang. What I would like to suggest is what I have called transversal exegesis, a comprehensive model of communication that embraces all three areas. In the puzzle pieces now, you may see the roles of the exegetes as such may be. In the left-hand area, his or her specific technical expertise is required. The exegesis determines the questions to which the historical text was an answer, the text as window. The right-hand area requires the heuristic competence to tap into biblical potentials. Exegesis determines the responses that the text evoked in the past may evoke in the present and future, the text as mirror, or, as in the field of reception history, the text as both window and mirror, and it is in this field that the hermeneutical and the heuristic competence of the exegete is required, a connoisseur de la carrière du sens. This is because the meaning of a biblical text does not exist in a petrified state, but as a fluid element, which is why the interpreter must not use static but dynamic tools of interpretation. At this level, the exegete does not have to decide between right and wrong sense, correct or incorrect applications. However, he or she can mark lines of meanings, variations and interruptions, chances as well as risks, richness and otherness of meanings. As far as theological interpretation is concerned, the exegete is not the Pope of meaning, a kind of historically informed Karl Barth, but he or she participates in the discourse of truth as an advocate of the text and its matter, its original matter, its potential in past, present, and future. Are you a historian or a theologian? My teacher Heinz Schürmann once was asked in the Vatican, and he replied, are you a piano player or a musician? Such transversal exegesis transgresses conventional boundaries. It follows a more consistently historical agenda. It more adroitly explores the dynamics of Bible reading, and it overcomes the exegete's isolation from the holistic process of theology, which makes biblical scholarship more and more irrelevant. Which hermeneutical frameworks determine the exchange, the discourse of truth, depends on the horizon of understanding of the reading, above all on its biographical and denominational or philosophical context. So neither Roland Barthes nor Karl Barth, neither exchange without solution nor solution beyond exchange, but one's own historically informed and theologically or existentially responsible standpoint in what has been called l'interpretazione infinita by Pier Cesare Boni. This scheme, I know, seems complex. However, a programmatic exclusion of a substantial part of the reading process would represent a reduction of complexity that one can allow oneself in most fields of life, apart from one field, the field of understanding in humanities. Our reflections therefore reinforce Tyson's option for a pluralistic, polyvalent hermeneutics, which he has put into the musical metaphor of polyphonic understanding. So, chapter 3, the proof in the pudding, Revelation 4. We are running out of time, so we only have a quick dessert. We should, of course, extensively deal with the left original meaning, that is the meaning the author and first recipients will realize in view of their cultural encyclopedia. The tradition history of our text reaches back to ancient Egyptian theology and Babylonian astrology. The synchronic approaches include modern dream psychology, so about 3,000 years of career of meaning. I confine myself to a single narrative element that belongs to the field of text pragmatics. I give you only the translation, New Revised Standard Version. After this, I looked, and there in heaven a door stood open. And the first voice, which I had heard speaking to me like a trumpet, said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." At once I was in the spirit, and there in heaven stood a throne with one seated on the throne. And the one seated there looks like jasper and carnelian, and around the throne is a rainbow that looks like an emerald. Around the throne are 24 thrones, and seated on the thrones are 24 elders, dressed in white robes, with golden crowns on their heads. Coming from the thrones are flashes of lightning, and rumblings and peals of thunder, and in front of the throne burn 7 flaming torches, which are the 7 spirits of God. And in front of the throne there is something like a sea of glass, like crystal. Around the throne and on each side of the throne are 4 living creatures full of eyes in front and back. The open door to otherworld is part of reader guidance. The only one who has the privilege of slipping through the door with a seer is the reader or hearer. He or she thus becomes a participant in the vision. The reader, the recipient, becomes a form of seer. This motive alone, the door to the other globe, would create a monograph on the history of reception, which would also lead to, for instance, the Narnia Chronicles, for example. Anyway, viewed from below, the carpet of the earth appears knotted in a senseless and confusing way, but viewed from above, from the throne hall, the visionary throne hall, it creates meaningful patterns. Each generation of readers that has climbed up through the door will see a different globe from above, but they will also see another throne hall. Albrecht Dürer in 1498, when the printing press began to establish itself, and with it a more literal representation of the biblical text, translates the words into an image. John's text, so to speak, is reproduced in new media. As the language of symbols cannot always be medialized into easy-to-read symbols, Dürer's apocalypse sometimes seems overloaded, a symbolic overkill, and leads to a lack of eidetic expression. However, the still peaceful world on the underside of the carpet is Dürer's contemporary world, and he who sits on the throne does not look like jasper and carnelian, an impressive example of negative theology, by the way, but he represents the contemporary image of God, an old, bearded man. To the right and left of the vision, you can see the heavy gates of the open door. We, the inhabitants of the world below, are partakers of the seer and share his perspective, which is very necessary, since soon enough the apocalyptical horsemen will sweep across the land, so that the only question that remains is why? We jump back almost 500 years to the Ottonian visual culture, in which the imagination was less bound to the largely oral transmission of the Bible. The Bamberg Apocalypse from the Reichenau Abbey about 1000 or 1020. The monks visualize the throne hall more daring than Dürer. In comparison with him, this world seems to be clearly organized, and it is identically elegant and does not mirror apocalyptic anxieties. The four beasts are, as has been customary since Irenaeus, gospel symbols, golden books in their claws. The 24 elders, only partially recognizable, are no longer individuals, unlike in Dürer's early modern work, but cult servants carrying the 7 candlesticks. Here too, God is not a precious stone, but a young man, so that the lamb may also be missing. God is Christologically and staurologically defined. You remember Colossians 1:15, Ekon tuti u tu aoratu. He's both the imperator mundi on his throne and transcendent above the world, lifted in a heaven blue mandala. And he holds the scroll containing, in a semi-oral culture, the meaning of the world. Hans Blumenberg, the sense of the world, is readable. Another heaven, but also another world. While the world in Dürer's view is in the calm before the storm of the apocalyptic labors, this world is no longer frightened. Heaven forms the apex of the cosmic hierarchy and liturgy. And let's go even one step further at around the same time. The so-called crown of Charlemagne is more likely to date from the Ottonian period. Its imagery represents both the heavenly Jerusalem and the throne hall. In a way, this most important symbol of political power in the Middle Ages and early modern times is a piece of our vision cast in gold. The shape of the octagon, unique among the known rulers' crowns, suggests the heavenly city of Jerusalem. You see the rainbow, the revelation of John is above the heavenly city, but also we have read about that in the throne hall. The rain hall is above the crown. The four arched, pearl-decorated panels of the crown allude to the pearl gates of the heavenly city. The original main gate-stone was a radiant jasper, the god symbol of Revelation 4. The type, shape, and arrangement of the jewels on the side plates translates the symbolic program of Revelation 4, the four beasts, the 7 torches, the 24 elders. Ten great sapphires symbolize the sea of glass over which the throne hall is built. I break off here. You see the irony. What was originally the fierce theocentric criticism of the Roman imperial power becomes here the legitimizing and indeed sanctifying symbol of this very power. The Roman emperor wears a crown that displays a revelation of John of Patmos. Anything goes. Roland Barthes, it seems, triumphs. Karl Barth is at a loss. Where now is the truth? But there may be also another theological interpretation. The advocates of the imperial idea might have argued that this crown is a symbol of Christ's empire, not the Roman Empire, but the Holy Roman Empire. After all, what we read at one of the panels is per me regis regunt, a sacramental understanding of power not identical with the absolute understanding of, say, Domitian. Reinhold Schneider and Heinrich Schlier drew on this Christian idea of empire to resist the apocalyptic vision of a 1,000-year empire in the Nazi propaganda. So, the inspiration is neither in the text nor in the recipient. It is not within any third of our scheme. It is in the scheme as such, namely in the discourse, or to put it in another way with Gregory the Great, who unites both Barthes in his theology, was a champion of reception history, divina loquia cum legente crescunt, the divine words grow with the reader. Or to say it with Cassian, as our spirit renews itself and grows in it, so does the face of the scriptures renew itself, and the beauty of understanding progresses with the one who tries to understand. Connationis 1411. There is a claim of truth, but it is only and hopefully disclosed in discourse. So anything goes. Roland Barthes was right, but also Karl Barth. There is a truth in the text that cannot be separated from our own truth or untruth. Meaning is not a pigeonhole, but a pigeon. But there is truth in the flight of a bird. Let me go back to the Bamberg apocalypse, which served as the logo of this evening. A bit daring myself, I can see it as a symbol of what I have called polyphonic understanding. There is a logos with a scroll that no one can open in the center, but he is transcendent. We have no chance of a deductive truth claim. But what we have are the fourfold perspectives of the different gospels and the more numerous perspectives of those who carry their own torches and can do inductive theology in their own way. Anything goes, but the truth is no chaotic noise, but polyphonic and dialogical. Conclusion, beyond Barth and Barth. At the head of his groundbreaking monograph, Truth and Method, Hans-Georg Gadamer places a poem by Rilke, and we are in his Jubilee year. Catch only what you have thrown yourself. All is mere skill and little game. But when you are suddenly the catcher of a ball thrown by an eternal partner, with accurate and measured swing, towards you, to your center, in an arch from the great bridge building of God, why? Catching then becomes a power, not yours, a world's. There is a connection between this hermeneutical poem and our very abstract scheme of transversal exegesis. The ball is of all sides of the game. It is not the ball of the author, nor of the text, nor of the recipients. It is a ball of an interplay, vertically like Karl Barth and horizontally like Roland Barthes. Indeed, transversal hermeneutics is more than a method, it is as serious as a game. And pursuing this game is the cheerful seriousness of the Revelation Reception Network and Seminar. Thank you very much for your patience and for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this. I don't, fascinating is the way that people typically describe these talks, but I really, really enjoyed this talk, and I really have a lot of thoughts about it, and I think a number of people here do as well. So, Knut, thank you very much for your talk. At this point, we will come to, in fact, the recipients of your text that you have read to us, and we will have some questions. So if you have questions, feel free to turn on your camera and raise your hand using either the Zoom tool or you raise your hand physically and I will notice it. And we have about 15 minutes for this. If while other people are putting together their questions, I guess I'll start with one of my own, and that was, as we put together, as you put together your uh, the Bühler-Organon model of communication, and you gradually were adding pieces to it. And I was following along at home, and I drew it myself while you were while, while you were putting it together on screen, and a lot of things clicked together. But I wonder if I could ask you this question: to what degree can an individual, in fact, what is the role of the individual in coming to a text or coming to a material object? What exactly is the task of the individual, and how do how does one determine that? And then the next, I guess, the second part would be, um, what then is the role of the community,
Mm,
uh, or maybe a corporative reading?
mm.
It seems like the individual is standing in reception, and so is the community. So I guess my question, which is not very focused because I'm still thinking about it myself, but yeah, what does the individual do, and how does the individual reader know what to do? There's so many options.
Yes,
How
yes.
do we read? What do we read? How do we choose how to read?
I think the first role is in Bühler's model, of course, the right position recipient, which is not necessarily an individual, but of course it can be an individual. And for instance, the first approaches in depth psychology were individual centered. In liberation theology and so on, it was more community centered. And there are different traditions of reading. Perhaps to use a cliche, the Protestant model is the grandma in her room reading the Bible, and the Catholic is the bishop in the cathedral with all the clergy and so on. So there are different forms of reading. And I think in some way it is helpful to understand churches as reading communities,
Mm.
um, but not only churches. There are other different reading communities. Um, but to find a sense for his own, I think is not possible without the very own biography of a reader. And the church horizon, that's why I tried to integrate the horizon in it, is a part of the biography. My biography is not only to be a Catholic, but there are many other influences in my biography. But certainly, one part of it is to be raised and socialized in the Catholic tradition. So the reading community and different reading communities merge in one biography. And to make a special claim as far as meaning is concerned, that the place is above in my model of transversal exegesis, above there is the discourse. And I even have, as a Catholic, of course, a place there for the church magisterial office, a Lehramt, but it is a very modest place. And I have certainly also a place of the individual meanings. But the magisterial's place would be as an idol, not as a reality in the former centuries, to be someone who has a charism to combine the charism of individuals and of reading communities, an advocate of the discourse.
Mm. Yeah.
Is this in your direction, Nathan?
Well, it is. I guess what's underlying my question is, to what extent does one ever grasp a text? Because it seems like the text ends up being some sort of eternal, not eternal, but eventually you can never grab it, and you need all these different approaches. And so I'm just kind of thinking through this with all these various methodologies that you've listed, And
And you must know what is a kairos or what approach.
yeah,
When at the LMU, I have to give a lecture and I have perhaps a historical approach, but when I have to preach in my parish, I have another approach, but you must not always tell what is a bridge between these approaches, but there must be a communication between the different senses. And so I think the exegete has a veto against some uses of the text.
yeah, yeah. Thank you very much. Is there another question? A camera just came on. I don't know if that symbolizes a question. But yes, Mark.
Thank you, Knut. It's very, very good of you to talk about the apocalypse, because this is the network for the apocalypse. But I also know that you do many things with different New Testament books. And Apostelgeschichte is one of those, of course. And could I ask you the question, just in very simple terms, what have you learned from the Wirkungsgeschichte of the Apostelgeschichte that is transferable more widely? Can you think of anything that over the last 10 years you have learned for us? Any wisdom?
It's my everyday business. At the moment, I'm writing on a 3 or 4 volume commentary on Acts. And in the first chapters, as you know, of course, we have Ascension, we have Pentecost, we have the Jerusalem community, which has a very, very deep history of reception. What I have learned is that theological commentaries are only one part and a modest part of the history of Revelation. I told it to Nathan. In the IKK, we have normally 3 focuses: patristic exegesis, Reformation exegesis, and 20th century exegesis. And IKK is evangelisch-katholisch, not ecumenical. So we try to be real Protestants and real Catholics. And I'm interested in Catholic history of reception, which is strong in the Middle Ages. And so I tried at first to make use of medieval commentaries, but they are as boring as their reputation is, even Beda Venerabilis, who have, after all, written refutations, but they're boring enough. So I tried to have a look on another form of reception history that is what I call habitualisierte Wirkungsgeschichte oder Rezeptionsgeschichte. That's the difference, which means reception in habits. To tell it in German, Rezeption mit Hand und Fuß, not only with your head. For instance, the summaries in the book of Acts, the 3 great summaries, have been a model for the first rules of orders, religious orders. Basilius, Cassian, Augustine, and only a bit Benedict. And so Basilius and Augustine lived from these summaries, and he tried to make it a style of life. So these orders were a bit of habitualisierte Rezeptionsgeschichte, not in letters, although we have the acts of the homilies of Augustine, for instance, but it was a form of rule of life. They tried to dramatize the Jerusalem community. This will become a problem in the early modern times, especially in Reformation, that there is one group in the church which makes an enactment of the summaries, and only one. And for the other, the 10 Commandments are enough or so. But this is one form. Another form is the liturgical year. Take Luke from the church year, and the only thing what you have is Remembrance Sunday. Luke is the, the legends say he is a painter, and in some way that is right. He has what I call eidetic theology. He's the only one who has Assumption. He has Pentecost. Most of the Christmas and Easter narratives, liturgical enactments are from Luke. So the church year, with all its customs and traditions, is a form of enacted history of reception. And of course, the painter Luke has inspired other painters, and the earliest not only paintings but other forms of what we call bildende Kunst in German are inspired by Luke. For instance, here in Munich, the Reidersche Tafel is the first painting or imagination of Assumption, and we have the Rabula Codex with the Pentecost sceneries. So Luke has inspired the art. Matthew, of course, was read in the liturgy. John was influential in the history of theology, but Luke was influential in the art history. So what I have learned is that there is a very rich habitualisierte Rezeptionsgeschichte, and in some way Luke was a revolution in media, a mediale Revolution. By the way, the idea to write a second book, Deuteros Logos, is in itself a revolution. The first time that an author, I have problems with this idea author, but who writes a commentary on his own gospel in some way, commentary by history, but that's another problem. And of course, we have it in John, of course.
Yeah, that's very, very helpful. Thank you. And it also reinforces the interest of this group, because for Apocalypse, for Revelation interest, the visual, the eidetic is so important in the reception. So Apostelgeschichte has that too, or Luke Acts has that too. That's very interesting. It also puts you a little bit in the direction of Christopher Rowland. Do you know that Christopher Rowland's insistence on the visual? That in some sense the literary, the scribal is but a secondary thing. It's the vision you have to try to get, reimagine, without, and the words are just there to help you with you have to decode into your own vision from the vision of the seer. Okay, thank you. Lovely.
I think that Apocalypse or Revelation of John and Luke Acts are the most fruitful books of the New Testament in the field of imagination. There's one difference. After the Tridentine Council, images from Revelation were forbidden, because they were revolutionary to show the Pope as a War of Babylon or Luther as an apocalyptic beast. On the one hand, Flugblätter, I don't know the English term, from Apocalypse were forbidden, but Luke Acts, of course, were promoted because this is a pious form of reception.
Fascinating. So I see more cameras on. Does that mean more questions? I wonder. Yes, Anne.
I want to thank you for this very interesting talk. It's great for us to think about strategies of interpretation, which is something we haven't done a lot of in this seminar so far. Yeah. But what strikes me as the Catholic-Protestant divide is how literally you take the book of Revelation as a prophecy. And I know I have Protestant friends who say, what else could it mean? It's what's going to happen at the end of time. And if you think about the medieval interpretation that led up to the Catholic interpretation that you've been talking about, it's not prophetic in the future. It's more historical or allegorical. And perhaps the only book of the New Testament that can really be interpreted allegorically, because what are you going to do with the Gospel of Luke? It's telling you a story that's a literal story about the life of Jesus and his disciples. And the book of Acts, you know, what happened after that. But I wonder if you could tweak that a little bit. Is there something I'm not understanding about what the difference in interpretation between seeing the book of Revelation as a prophecy looking forward and expecting it to happen the way that series of books called what's it called? Born Again? No.
Left Behind? Is that
Left Behind, yes. Where
Okay.
you actually have helicopters as locusts and, you know,
Yeah. And
everything is very, very,
Chernobyl is a word for Wermut in German. I don't know the English word. So sometimes it's striking. Yes. By the way, when I gave my lecture as a candidate here in LMU in the year 2001, the title was Apocalyptic Images. And just the week before, we had a Twin Tower a terror. And so
Right.
the people said, oh, this is a very topical lecture, but I hadn't it in mind. But in all news were apocalyptic images, and sometimes prophecies are self-fulfilling. Yes, I think it is not. Yes, we have waves of reception, sometimes realized eschatology, sometimes realizing eschatology, and sometimes the future aspect. It is not exactly of denominations. I think that the Middle Ages were less future orientated, as at least as a book of Revelation is concerned, than perhaps early modern times.
I think so too, at
Yeah.
least until the 12th century or the 13th century.
Yes, yes.
But
We have
certainly
here
the earlier interpretations aren't interested in that particularly.
yes. And we have in Germany, we had the Wiedertäuferreich, the Anabaptists in Münster, for instance. But that, in fact, was a form of realized eschatology after all. Yes, I think it is not only a question of the denomination or so, but we have sometimes waves of apocalypticism. For instance, in the Catholic Church, apocalyptics was a very topical subject in the Nazi area. Hitler called his own empire the 1,000 Years Empire, but the church, the resistant church, called him the Antichrist. And so it not only depends of your own denominational tradition, but also of your experience you have. And sometimes you say, oh, this is now an apocalyptic experience. What I feel, what I have difficulties with is that to read apocalypse as a form of a plan, like the plan of a bus or something like that, with certain times. But sometimes, and I hope we do not go into such a times, are more or less apt to make us feel apocalyptic.
Indeed, it feels very apocalyptic some days.
Oh, that's
I think we should offer our speaker a warm round of applause for this very engaging talk. Thank you very much, Knut, for joining us. And thank you, Colin. It's good to see you finally had time to show up.
I finally was able to ditch class once. It's great to see you. Thank you so
Good to
much.
see you, Colin.
Good to see you, Anne. Nathan.
Only one announcement this week, and that is we will have the last session, the last scheduled session no, I'm sorry, there will still be two, there's two more. One will be April 3rd, Thursday, 5 p.m. Germany time as usual. We will be having Jenny Jiang Laska, who will be presenting on a topic to be determined, but probably on Reformation reception, Zurich Reformation reception of Revelation. And then we have on May the 1st, Alexandru Ionita from the Lucian Biaga University in Sibiu in Romania, and he will be talking about the New Jerusalem separatist movement within the Romanian Orthodox Church.
Wow,
And yeah, that'll be fun. Tune in for Schismatic Heavenly Jerusalem. In the end of that meeting, May 1st, we'll also, we're planning to have our yearly network planning meeting just to talk about, what projects we're working on and maybe what we want to do next year. And so that is on May the 1st. So those are the two scheduled things to happen. Otherwise, I think we're done with this meeting. Thanks again, Knut. Thanks to everyone for showing up. And
Mark, don't forget to visit me if you are in Munich again.
Yeah. Good.
Gerne, danke.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.